What's happening, everybody? It's Brent Axe, and we're live here on the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page. Coming off the heels of a loss for Syracuse basketball in overtime, Miami 69, Syracuse 65, the final score. And that is the end of the regular season for the Syracuse basketball Orange. It is all one-and-done play. Survive and advance from here on out for Syracuse, and a Syracuse team that will go to Greensboro next week in the ACC tournament as a 6 seed. They're going to play in the 9:30-ish game. We know those games typically don't start on time in conference tournament play, so somewhere in that 9:30 to 10 o'clock range, Syracuse will tip off. We don't know their opponent as of yet. If North Carolina beats Duke, then they get the 11 seed. And that's the one team Syracuse does not want to face if they're going to have any hope of making a deep run in the ACC tournament. But that took a big-time hit today because Elijah Hughes did not play the second half of Syracuse's game in Miami. Jim Boeheim mentioning at his post-game press conference that Elijah's been hitting the head a bunch this year. He was a little blurry. Maybe could have come back into this game if needed, but obviously we didn't see him. Sat on the bench. All the camera shots they showed of Elijah Hughes had his hood up and did not look happy, looked pretty miserable out there, certainly wasn't feeling good for whatever afflicted him. What happened with Hughes was at the end of the first half, he kind of got knocked down and hit the back of his head on Barama Sidibe. I believe he hit his knee or his leg. And I think precautions took hold there, and they did not put Hughes back into the game. Normally, you wouldn't see anybody out there on the bench if it was a serious concussion or a situation where you reacted badly to light or loud sounds. So his status uncertain for Wednesday. Syracuse's defense, though Miami only scored 69 points in this game, because they missed a bunch of wide-open shots, made them when they matter, but still a pretty porous defensive effort for the Orange. Obviously, the offense for 32 minutes or so, this game was an absolute slog, and that was on both sides. Now, there was a stretch in the second half where Miami went 7 minutes without scoring. They missed 12 shots in a row, in this game, and Syracuse could not take advantage of it on the offensive side. They go 5 of 25 from three-point range overall. Lose this one to Miami, so the Orange will fall to 17-14, 10-10 in ACC play. That will be their that will be their regular season record. And we'll see what happens in the ACC tournament. Obviously, Syracuse is going to have to win the ACC tournament to make the NCAA tournament. That's not looking good. So NIT appears to be Syracuse's postseason fate beyond Greensboro. I'll give you a couple more numbers here. Hi, everybody, by the way. Welcome into the chat. I'll respond to you guys coming up here shortly. Always love to hear where you're watching us from, so make sure you tell us where you're doing that today. So overall, Syracuse 24 of 65. That's 37% shooting. Miami, not much better, 23 of 63. That's 36.5%. Here's how close and how bad Syracuse and Miami were shooting the ball. Syracuse was 36.9%. Miami 36.5% in this game. From three-point range, Syracuse 5 of 25. That's 20%. Miami was 10 of 31. That's 32%. Free throws matter, right? They didn't for Syracuse in this game. 12 of 19. That's 63% from the free throw line. Meanwhile, Miami 13 of 15. That's 86% in this game. The Canes out-rebounded Syracuse 43-41. Syracuse did have 17 offensive rebounds in this game. That's more than Miami's 16, but ultimately the second chance points that Miami piled up when they had good offensive opportunities really helped them in this game. Miami assisted 18 of their 23 field goals. Syracuse just 10 assists on the day. Ball movement has not been Syracuse's strong suit on offense, and certainly was not in this game as well, with or without Elijah Hughes. Wanted to look at this. Points in the paint, Syracuse actually won pretty convincingly, 32-20, but second chance points ended up in favor of Syracuse, 15-13, but Miami piled up a lot of those in the first half and the early part of the second half. To really give them an edge in that sense and hang in this game before Vasilovic hit some threes. Miami took advantage. Now, they didn't hit some free throws down the stretch to allow this game to go to overtime, but Syracuse missed all their threes in overtime, had plenty of chances to put this game away, had plenty of chances to take the lead in this game. Yeah, without Elijah Hughes, this was a team that was confused offensively, but Miami just gave them every opportunity to just kind of get out of there with an ugly win, and Syracuse could not take advantage. So ultimately, Marek Dolezaj leads the Orange with 17 points in this game, 7 rebounds, a solid game for him, 7 of 12 shooting the ball for him. Joe Girard really struggled for most of the game, shot 5 of 17 overall, 2 of 10 from three-point range. Did hit some big shots in the second half, the game-tying shot to make the score 56-56 and ultimately send the game to overtime. But a lot of hero ball shots, a lot of bad threes, a lot of contested threes. He does end up with 13 points and 4 assists on the day. Elsewhere for Syracuse, Buddy Boeheim had 12 points, 5 rebounds on the day for Buddy. Or I'm sorry, no. Buddy had 2 rebounds, 3 assists. I'm looking here at Barama Sidibe, who had 10 rebounds on the day, 5 offensive and 5 defensive, pardon me there. Buddy really struggles on defense. We've talked about this a lot throughout the year, but a lot of the open shots that teams are getting, we saw it last game against Boston College. We saw it again today against Miami. Whether those teams cash in those threes or not is always the big thing. They're all going to Buddy's side. Not that Joe's much better defensively, and he's only 6'1" on his tippy toes, so you're leaving a lot of space there on defense anyway. But Buddy really struggles in the zone, and we saw that today. Quincy Guerrier played 30 minutes, had 8 points and 6 rebounds. Jesse Edwards, I thought, had a pretty solid game. Had to play 13 minutes because Barama Sidibe fouled out again. His recent string of terrific games kind of came to an end today, though he did have 10 rebounds. Jesse with 5 points, 3 rebounds, had the follow-up slam in overtime. I thought he played 13 solid minutes in there. I thought he played pretty good defense and showed that he's one of the more talented big men that Syracuse has on the roster, and I think big things are ahead of him next season. John Bolajok is somebody who has to improve in a lot of ways, but is a terrific offensive player. There's some opportunity there. If Syracuse gets Patrick Tepe, the transfer center from Columbia, it's going to be interesting. Maybe Syracuse will have some help in the big man department that they don't have right now, but clearly that they struggled in that range for most of the season. But, credit where it's due. Jesse actually had a pretty decent game today in a reserve role. Looked like he belonged out there. He wants the ball. He calls for it. He's aggressive at the rim. Still a freshman that's going to make freshman mistakes at times, but I thought he had a pretty decent game today. So, yeah, that's what Syracuse has ahead of them now. They're a 6 seed. They'll play the late game Wednesday night, and they have to win 4 games in a row to win the ACC Tournament Championship with Elijah Hughes' status uncertain, with a porous defense, with an offense that has not kicked into gear when needed. Their three-point shooting has just nosedived over the last, 10 to 12 games, the second half of ACC play. Anybody want to take that bet, that the Orange are going to win the ACC tournament? You'll get pretty good odds on that, pretty good return on your investment if you're willing to make that bet. All right, let's see what you guys are saying in the comments here. Ron saying, no NIT, stop the pain. Yeah, even if Syracuse, goes to the NIT, as it certainly appears they're going to, they'll have to go on the road. I haven't looked at an NIT bracket lately because why would we do that? But even if they got a higher seed in the NIT, they can't play at home, obviously, because the Carrier Dome is under renovation. So they'll be on the road in the NIT as it is. Christian saying thought it was comical that Boeheim said Syracuse may not be a three-point shooting team. Took long enough. It's interesting because there was a stretch there, and I understand it was earlier in the season and things get tougher in ACC play, particularly with teams that really put pressure on Joe and Buddy and Elijah defensively, and for the most part could get away with not guarding Barama, not guarding Quincy Guerrier. Marek is, kind of all over the court, and you just kind of take your chances with him. There was a stretch there, though, where Syracuse had 6 or 7 games in a row where they hit double-digit three-pointers, and you're thinking to yourself, this is going to be a team that lives and dies by the three. That went away, obviously, in the second half of the ACC season, really the entire conference season, slowly but surely. And they've got 3 or 4 guys that can hit threes. They're just not hitting the open shots they're getting. And Girard's taking contested threes. And I like what I see out of Joe Girard in a lot of ways, but he appears to kind of hit a freshman wall at that shot, that tied it at 56. He has his moments. I think a freshman has become a sophomore in some ways, but it's interesting how Syracuse looked like a team that was just going to absolutely thrive on the three-pointer, but that has been absolutely not the case. And that's a trend. That's a pattern onto why Syracuse is not shooting well from three-point range. Just look at the results in the last 10 to 12 games and in ACC play overall. And Dan says Buddy gives up so many threes. He really does, Dan. it's pretty bad. Buddy is a liability on defense at this point. There's just no other way to put it. He gives up a lot of threes. He's 6'6". He covers a lot of ground, but just can't move in that zone. And when you got a guy like Vasiljevic who can hit from 25 feet, let alone guarding him at 20 feet. He can hit from 25 feet. He can hit from 30. That kid's got NBA range. You got to be on him. You got to make his life more difficult. Wong had a terrific game for Miami, and that's interesting because Syracuse was out their leading scorer, right, and Elijah Hughes in the second half. Miami didn't have their leading scorer at all. Chris Likes got hurt Wednesday night when Miami played Virginia. He got hit in the face. Elijah got hit in the head, in the back of the head. Likes got hit in the eye, had an eye injury, did not play in this game today. So both teams were without their leading scorers. Miami for the entire game, Syracuse second half and overtime without their leading scorer at this point. John says, after Buddy leaves, if Boeheim plans to stick around, is there any chance the administration pressures him to leave to get a fresh start? No chance. If Jim Boeheim leaves, it's not going to be due to pressure by the administration. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying I don't see it happening. I don't see John Wildhat doing that at this point. But a lot can change in a couple of years, right? Syracuse does have Dior Johnson, the 5-star recruit that's coming in. We think, unless the NBA's one-and-done rule changes by then, at that point he might consider going to the NBA. If he coaches Dior Johnson, that will be beyond Buddy, after Buddy, if you will, AB for the Jim Boeheim era, which, 44th consecutive season with a winning season for Syracuse, 17-14, 10-10 in league play. Nobody's handing out any trophies for that. It is noteworthy. He's never had a losing season and will not have a losing season no matter what happens in the postseason coming up. But if change is made there, it's not going to be by the administration pushing him out. If Syracuse has a few more seasons like this, maybe the heat ramps up. In my opinion, will change. But as it stands today, no. No is the answer to that question. Mary Ellen saying, I don't think they'll do well in the tournament. They should just call it a season. After that, they should only shame themselves in the NIT. I'm always a fan, but hopefully they will get it together for next year. Paul saying the reason for the abysmal three-point shooting is simple, poor shot selection due to a lack of ball movement exacerbated by weak interior play. That combination eliminates the step-in three-point shot from the inside-out pass. Paul, it's a great analysis there. I want to focus on what you said about the ball movement issue. This team just doesn't move the ball. There were times, there were moments during the season where we saw that happen, but overall this team doesn't. It's a lot of ISO play. It's a lot of hero ball. It's a lot of, and I don't understand that. This is an offense that's got to work harder, with or without Hughes, by the way, but especially with Elijah Hughes out of the game. Move the ball. Get the open shot, inside out, as you said. Put it into Dole, kick it out to Buddy. Put it into Barama, kick it out to Joe. But Joe, he's an offensive-minded point guard. He's not really a point guard. Joe is best suited at the 2. Had to be the 1 this year, of course, with Jalen Carey kind of outplaying him, and Buddy is the established 2. But that surprises me. It really does, because that's when this team's at its best. They're encouraged to play ISO ball sometimes and go off screens, and when that kind of gets ingrained in your head, that's how you play. But that is, I can understand the frustration level on that for sure, because when Elijah Hughes goes down, you got to move the ball. You got to get the best, potential shots, the best open shots that are there. Dolezaj had a great game. I think this is the Dolezaj Syracuse needs. It's certainly going to be the Dolezaj Syracuse needs to have any success whatsoever in the ACC tournament. But let's think about this for a second, right? So Elijah Hughes' status is uncertain for Wednesday. And if you're Elijah Hughes, look, if I know Elijah Hughes like I think I do, he's going to play if he can. He'll want to be there for his teammates. But he's got an NBA career to think about. He is all but certain to go to the NBA. That's just speculation on my part. But the scouts love him. He's going to be 22 years old. He will get picked in that draft. And today is another example of what can happen if you come back. You hit your head, you're out for the second half. You twist your knee. Injury is always looming there. As an older player, as somebody that could cash in, I wouldn't blame him at all if he did it. And I think today is something to think about there. But we just had the comment from Mary Ellen, what's it worth to play in the NIT? It's all for the younger guys, right? For a guy like Elijah Hughes, who cares? He'll want to be there for his teammates. He'll want to do the best they can. But we saw it the last time Syracuse went to the NIT when they lost to Ole Miss. They didn't really care. That's just kind of there's a reason it's you're playing for, 67th place or whatever it is in the NIT. And Syracuse doesn't have the tools to make a deep run, to make a Jerry McNamara-like miracle run through a conference tournament to get to the NCAA tournament here. So we're kind of resigned to watching the 3-letter tournament and not the 4-letter tournament at this point. Josh noting that Gerard, made the big shot. Look, Joe made that shot in the paint. You have the coast-to-coast layup. I like his guts. I like his determination, but he's just got to be smarter about some of the shots that he takes. I understand he probably felt he had to take on a bigger role with Elijah Hughes out of this game, but as a point guard, you've got to recognize when you're not hot on the offensive end. He did make a couple of shots in the second half, as you noted, but you got to distribute the ball too. And he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place there because he can't hit threes. He can create offense. You want an aggressive player. You certainly don't want a player to back down, but you got to be smart and you got to know when you have it and you got to know who else is out there. But without Elijah Hughes, you could just see how lost this team was. He's the catalyst. He's the guy that's going to get the ball in some of those situations. I think Syracuse to push this to overtime, for Joe to make that shot, to overcome their bad free throw shooting, their bad three-point shooting was notable, and we mentioned some of the reasons that Syracuse did that. Miami, frankly, the shots that they got and the opportunities that they had, we were talking about it during our live chat on syracuse.com during the game. My man Ben Burrows behind the scenes here on the live chat was even saying this, woulda, coulda, shoulda. The game ended up the way it did, but with the looks Miami was getting, they should have been up 12 to 14 points in this game. And that stretch where they missed 12 shots in a row, and then you look up at the end of that and the game's still tied, it just shows you what a dreadful offensive game this was for a while. John's from Pittsburgh. Should Jesse redshirt next year? That's an interesting question. It's a really interesting question because we mentioned you got John Bolajak. If Patrick Tape from Columbia comes in, now all of a sudden you got a logjam at that position. Who kind of outplays and wins the competition at that position? John Bolajak is a terrific offensive player, still has some work to do with his footwork and defense and anything that you would expect a younger big man to work on. I think Jesse Edwards is pretty darn impressive. And if he has the patience to redshirt and wants to stick around, I would encourage him to at least look into that. But he's certainly somebody that looks like he could beat out some players for time. If Tape transfers here, he's not transferring here to sit on the bench. You got to play him, and he should play him. He's a good player. Speaking of Ben, and Ben, you want to put the link here in the chat, please do. Ben Burrows talked to Patrick Tape this week and kind of got his mindset about what he's thinking about in terms of transferring and where he would fit at Syracuse, what the coaches are telling him. And Ben did a great job with that interview if you want to check that out. So that's an intriguing question. I don't really have the answer for it right now. I don't think Jesse ultimately would. I don't want to speak for him there, but it's certainly something to think about going into next year. Good question. Mike says Miami stinks. They're ranked 109 without their leading scorer. Syracuse still loses. Syracuse is out their leading scorer too. But to call this a game that Syracuse should have won, can't disagree with that. Michelle saying that thinks Carey would be a better point guard at this point. If he didn't have the hand injury, didn't kind of fall into Jim Boeheim's doghouse, you'd be right about that. Speaking of transfers and questions going into the offseason, a lot of speculation on what Jalen Carey's going to do because all of a sudden you got an interesting thing at guard because you've got Kadari Richmond coming in next year. So you'd have Joe back at guard. You would have Buddy back at guard. Howard Washington still on this roster. Remember, nobody leaves this roster unless they transfer, right? Because there's no seniors on this team. No offense to our friend Sean Belvey, but there's no players of significance that are moving on. You get everybody back in theory unless somebody wants to transfer, right? So you got all of a sudden you got a log jam at guard. Then you go beyond that. The class of 2022. We mentioned Dior Johnson. Syracuse has a terrific chance at five-star recruit Chance Westry. He hasn't committed yet. We thought he would. There was intel. There was reason to believe he would commit after he visited with Dior Johnson for the North Carolina game. Hasn't happened yet. I still think Syracuse will get him ultimately and has a good shot at him. So that position's it's getting pretty crowded back there. So I wonder how Jalen Carey fits into that. There's no question about the fact that he is more of a pure point guard, though, than Gerard at this point. William saying, why can't we develop an offense to get guys open shots? It's just ball movement. That's all that is. I agree with your statement, but there's a simple answer to that question. Josh saying that Buddy will be good next year. Look, Buddy was good this year. Buddy led the ACC in three-point shots. Buddy is in the conversation for the most improved player in the league. The reason he shouldn't win it and won't win it is his defense, right? I don't think people that vote on these awards really look at that kind of thing. And what a joke, by the way. all these conversations about players of the year, postseason awards, the Julius Erving Award for the best small forward in the country, all ACC first team, and how much Elijah Hughes gets left off those discussions. Today's game notwithstanding, and he missed the NC State game with a groin injury. He has been the leading scorer in the league, the most consistent player in the league all year round. And I understand that Syracuse is not what they typically are, but they're a sixth-place team. They're not 12th place. He's the leading scorer in the league. And there was a conversation that Jay Billis, and I love Jay Billis. Jay Billis has forgotten more basketball than I'll ever know. And Seth Greenberg and LaFonso Ellis, and they do this show on the ACC network where they kind of sit in the back of their tour bus at whatever college game day location they're at, and they just talk ACC hoops. And they were discussing who should be the player of the year. And Elijah Hughes didn't even get in the conversation. Like, how does that happen? He's got to at least be put in the conversation. It's probably going to be Jordan Nwora from Louisville or Vernon Carey Jr. I understand that. And you got some terrific players in this league that will be in that conversation. How does he not even get mentioned in that? Come on, fellas. You got to put Elijah Hughes in there. But after today, we'll see if he even plays again with his uncertain status after sitting out the second half of this one with what appeared to be a head injury. A couple more comments from you guys here. Just a reminder that we do put this out on YouTube. If you miss it here live on Facebook, Syracuse Orange Sports, if you want to check that out. And we put it in podcast form for you as well. Subscribe to syracuse.com podcast where you get my podcast, the Syracuse Sports Podcast, Syracuse Football Podcast. Stephen Bailey did one this week previewing spring football, which actually starts on Sunday, believe it or not, for Syracuse as they look to recover from last year's vastly disappointing 5-7 football season. So if you can't be with us here live, just a reminder that we put this chat in those places. Not sure how many more there's going to be because, Syracuse is now in survive and advance mode here. But we know we'll be doing one Wednesday night after the ACC tournament game. That's going to be more like Thursday morning because they got that late game. Love those late games. Dodged that 9:30 bullet for so long. And now they're going to play at least one 9:30 game, and then if they win that one, another 9:30 game, and if they win that one, I think they play at like 8:30. It's just like going to be mainline and coffee next week. But I don't anticipate Syracuse going far, so I guess that's the trade-off there. We shall see. I'll tell you what, guys, I'm going to end it right there. Always appreciate you coming by. As mentioned, we will be here Wednesday night, really late, so I hope you can stay up with us. Whenever that game ends, we'll be right here on Facebook Live after Jim Boeheim's press conference. It is on YouTube. It is on a podcast form as well. If you miss it here live, please check out my recap on Sunday morning. All of our great coverage. Donna DeToda down in Miami. And Chris Carlson's going to keep you updated on the ACC tournament bracket throughout the weekend. We know that Syracuse is a 6 seed. Who their opponent will be and what plays out still to be determined as of this conversation here. So follow Chris on Twitter. Of course, get on syracuse.com and check that out. He'll be keeping you updated on that throughout the weekend. Thanks to Ben Burrows behind the scenes. And we will talk to you again Wednesday night. Survive and advance is what Syracuse is in now, finishing the regular season 17-14, 10-10 in ACC play with a 69-65 loss to Miami in overtime. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody.